You've been trying to go against the colonial forces oppressing your country, and there's finally a glimmer of hope as America gives hints of helping your country. But suddenly, they give support to your colonizers. Feeling ultimately betrayed by this, what would you do? This is technically what happened before the Vietnam War. This domino fell and triggered a set of events that would make way for a complex war in Vietnam for several years. Hello there, and welcome to Eventful Insights. In today's episode, I'll be narrating the timeline of the Vietnam War in detail. Join me in this journey of complicated politics and a tale of a nation being divided and then united again. But before that, what's your surface knowledge about the Vietnam War? You might want to comment that down to see if you're right with those facts later on in the video. We start our story with a hopeful nation wanting to be set free from its colonizers. In 1945, the persistent pursuit of independence and liberation from colonist countries consumed both Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese people, a determination that can be seen from several of their actions. With Japan's surrender that same year, Ho Chi Minh seized the moment to assert Vietnam's autonomy. On September 2, 1945, during a tense atmosphere, Ho Chi Minh delivered the Declaration of Independence, formally inaugurating the Democratic Republic of Vietnam and boldly proclaiming Vietnam's inherent right to sovereignty. In his passionate address, Ho Chi Minh drew inspiration from the quotes from the Declaration of Independence of both the United States and France, articulating a profound alignment with universal human rights principles. By invoking excerpts from the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man, he showed the absolute rights of all peoples to equality, happiness and freedom, positioning Vietnam's struggle from colonial rule. During World War II, Ho Chi Minh, the Viet Minh, and the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, teamed up, which was important for Vietnam's fight for freedom. The OSS had two major tasks. Firstly, it focused on gathering and analyzing foreign intelligence, a crucial role during World War II. This duty, mainly handled by the Research and Analysis Branch, provided vital information to aid wartime strategies. Secondly, the OSS engaged in unconventional warfare, involving activities like sabotage and support for resistance movements. And so, this partnership wasn't just about fighting Japan, it also boosted Vietnam's determination to govern itself. The OSS saw Vietnam as a key ally against Japan, so they gave vital support, strengthening the bond between them. Ho Chi Minh's declaration reflected the strong determination of all Vietnamese people. They were ready to use all their energy and resources to protect their new freedom, showing their unwavering commitment to independence. This declaration marked a major turning point in Vietnam's journey towards sovereignty and self-rule. Despite the collaboration between the OSS and Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh during World War II, the United States remained cautious of Ho's communist affiliations and opposed his ascent to power. Consequently, the US urged France to acknowledge and accommodate what it deemed as authentic Vietnamese nationalism. That's why, in 1950, the United States allocated a substantial sum of $15 million in military and economic assistance to France, a decision that shifted the Indochina War and was relevant to the Cold War. Despite initial hesitations about direct involvement in colonial conflicts and concerns regarding France's political and military position in Indochina, the US chose to provide this aid. The announcement of this assistance came on May 8, 1950, with the Secretary of State highlighting the necessity of aiding France and the associated state of Indochina in stabilizing the region and fostering peaceful and democratic development. This aid formed part of a comprehensive strategy aimed at curtailing communist expansion in Asia and bolstering regional allies. Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese people perceived the US choice to back the French rather than supporting Vietnamese independence as a betrayal. As the United States solidified its backing of the French, Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh found themselves with no other choice than to seek assistance from the Soviet Union and China for political, military and economic support in their struggle for independence. This decision deepened the Viet Minh's connections to international communism and bolstered Ho Chi Minh's standing as a communist leader. Then the Battle of Dien Bien Phu happened. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu, an important event in the First Indochina War, demonstrated a significant victory for the Viet Minh over the French. In late 1953, French forces strategically occupied Dien Bien Phu near the Laotian border, aiming to sever Viet Minh supply lines and establish a secure base for offensive maneuvers. However, General Nguyen Giap and the Viet Minh swiftly encircled the French garrison with a formidable force of 40,000 troops, employing heavy artillery to breach the French defenses. Despite substantial military assistance from the United States, the French found themselves outmatched by the relentless assault of the Viet Minh. Following 57 days of intense combat, the besieged French garrison ultimately surrendered on May 7, 1954, after enduring a grueling 20-hour battle. The surrender at Dien Bien Phu served as a significant blow to French prestige and effectively marked the end of their colonial reign in Indochina. In the aftermath of this huge defeat, the French government pursued a negotiated settlement, leading to the Geneva Conference later that year. Consequently, France made the decision to withdraw from Vietnam, thereby concluding the First Indochina War. On June 1, 1954, the Saigon military mission, led by U.S. Air Force Colonel Edward Lansdale, was a secretive initiative launched in South Vietnam to conduct psychological warfare and paramilitary operations. Established with the aim of supporting the pro-Western Vietnamese government and countering the communist influence of the Viet Minh, Lansdale's mission focused on training the Army of the Republic of Vietnam in psychological warfare tactics, while undertaking paramilitary actions against the enemy, drawing from Lansdale's successful experiences in the Philippines. The mission orchestrated a comprehensive psychological warfare campaign to sway the Vietnamese army and government in Hanoi, employing strategies to disseminate misinformation, sow confusion among adversaries, and shape public opinion to bolster the pro-Western cause. Alongside psychological tactics, the mission also executed paramilitary activities aimed at disrupting the Viet Minh and strengthening the South Vietnamese government, including training initiatives for the Vietnamese National Army, establishment of paramilitary groups, and support for anti-communist endeavors in the region. The impact of the Saigon military mission, helmed by Lansdale, was substantial, leaving an enduring mark on the political and military landscape of South Vietnam during a pivotal era of the Cold War. Lansdale's unconventional methods and close ties with President Ngo Diem greatly influenced the region's trajectory and shaped U.S. involvement in Vietnam. On July 21, 1954, the Geneva Accords resulted in the partition of Vietnam along the 17th parallel. Despite the Accords' assertion that the 17th parallel is not meant to serve as a political or territorial boundary, it swiftly assumes that precise role. This separation caused political tensions and set the stage for the Vietnam War. Economically, it created differences between the regions. These economic approaches deepened the gap between the two areas. Culturally, the division highlighted existing differences. Influences from China in the north and Indo-Malays in the south, along with distinct food preferences, language variations, and religious practices, underscored the cultural contrasts. Socially, the divide affected how people were perceived. Under the guidance of Ho Chi Minh, North Vietnam established itself as a communist nation, receiving support from both the Soviet Union and China. On the other hand, South Vietnam, led by President Ngo Diem, embraced capitalism and received backing from the United States. As efforts to hold reunification elections faltered, the two regions started to fortify their distinct political and economic states. In the north, a drive towards socialist industrialization was underway, while in the south, endeavors were made to construct a new anti-communist government with assistance from the United States. America's support for South Vietnam during the war can be understood within the framework of combating the spread of communism, as the US sought to prevent the establishment of a communist regime in Southeast Asia, viewing it as a threat to its own interests and security. The Red Scare, a period of intense fear of communism in the United States during the late 1940s and 1950s, stemmed from concerns about communism's global spread. This fear intensified following key events such as the Soviet Union's successful atomic bomb test and the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Alongside the Korean War and broader Cold War tensions, these events heightened anti-communist sentiment and fueled the Red Scare. Although the Vietnam War wasn't the primary trigger for the Red Scare, it unfolded within this context of heightened fear of communism. Furthermore, the North was viewed as politically adept and culturally refined, while the South was seen as friendly, open, and business-minded. These social distinctions mirrored broader political and economic disparities. But on November 2nd, 1963, Nguyen Diem was killed by his own military leaders in a coup d'etat, with implicit backing from American authorities. Diem's presidency was characterized by authoritarian governance and favoritism, sparking dissatisfaction among the South Vietnamese populace and widespread Buddhist demonstrations protesting religious discrimination. President Kennedy and his advisors, including Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge Jr., reluctantly concluded that Diem's regime needed to be ousted due to deteriorating political and military conditions in South Vietnam. With tacit approval from the US, a coalition of ambitious South Vietnamese army generals orchestrated a coup to overthrow Diem and his administration, resulting in his arrest and subsequent assassination. The violent demise of Diem had profound repercussions, plunging South Vietnam into turmoil and triggering a series of coups and political instability. In 1964, US President Lyndon B. Johnson introduced the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution to Congress, a critical moment that dramatically heightened American participation in the Vietnam War. President Johnson presented the resolution on August 5, 1964, following alleged attacks by North Vietnamese torpedo boats on US destroyers Maddox and Turner Joy in the Gulf of Tonkin on August 2nd and August 4th, respectively. Passed by both houses of Congress on August 7, 1964. The resolution bestowed broad authority upon President Johnson to employ conventional military force in Southeast Asia without a formal declaration of war. It sanctioned the President to take all necessary actions to aid any member or protocol state of the Southeast Asia Collective Defense Treaty, including the use of armed forces to repel attacks and thwart further aggression in the region. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution emerged as the primary constitutional justification for the rapid expansion of US military engagement in the Vietnam War, resulting in a substantial surge in American troops and resources committed to the conflict. Before we head on to the battles that could be highlighted from the Vietnam War, what do you think of the political landscape at that time? Let me know in the comment section below. If you want to know more about the politics and tension between different nations, head on to our channel for videos like this. Going back, by the end of 1963, the number of US military advisors stationed in South Vietnam had surged to 15,000, marking a notable escalation from the initial 700 advisors dispatched by the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s and the 11,000 advisors deployed by the conclusion of 1962. Under the authorization of the Kennedy administration, additional Special Forces troops and military advisors were dispatched to lend support to the South Vietnamese government. Concurrently, the Viet Cong, the communist guerrilla forces operating within South Vietnam, experienced a bolstering of their power and influence. This enabled them to mount more frequent and intensified attacks against both the South Vietnamese government and US forces, amplifying the already dire situation on the ground. In November 1963, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy occurred, a mere 21 days following the overthrow of the South Vietnamese government in a coup that installed a military junta. Kennedy's untimely demise made for immense changes, thrusting Lyndon B. Johnson into the presidency amidst the backdrop of enduring challenges in Vietnam. These challenges deepened the inherent instability within South Vietnam and the escalating might of the Viet Cong insurgency. Lyndon B. Johnson's approach to the Vietnam War was marked by a decision to intensify American participation in the conflict. Despite receiving counsel advising against further military engagement, Johnson opted to escalate American involvement in Vietnam in 1965. This choice entailed the deployment of combat troops to Vietnam, the commencement of Operation Rolling Thunder, an aerial assault campaign targeting North Vietnam, and the dispatch of 2 combat divisions to the region. Johnson's decision to amplify the war effort was motivated by his steadfast commitment to containing communism, apprehensions regarding the potential collapse of South Vietnam to North Vietnamese forces, and considerations of domestic political ramifications. Despite facing internal debates and reservations within his administration, Johnson's resolve to escalate the conflict resulted in a deepening of American military entanglement in the war. It was conducted on March 2, 1965, and extended until November 2, 1968, spanning over 3.5 years. Operation Rolling Thunder aimed to achieve multiple objectives, such as boosting the morale of South Vietnam, dismantling North Vietnam's transportation and industrial systems, and impeding the flow of personnel and resources into South Vietnam. Despite the prolonged duration and intensity of the bombing campaign, Operation Rolling Thunder ultimately fell short of achieving its intended goals. Over time, the operation became increasingly inefficient, prioritizing the generation of sortie missions, and the volume of bombs dropped over strategic efficacy. Ultimately, the operation's limited effectiveness, coupled with the pursuit of peace negotiations, prompted the gradual reduction and eventual termination of Operation Rolling Thunder in 1968. During the Vietnamese New Year holiday of Tet in 1968, the North Vietnamese Army, also known as NVA and Viet Cong or VC guerrilla fighters, launched a massive coordinated assault against US and South Vietnamese forces throughout South Vietnam, known as the Tet Offensive. The attacks, which occurred on January 30th to 31, 1968, during an expected ceasefire, caught American and South Vietnamese troops off guard due to their scale and intensity, with intelligence failing to predict such a large-scale onslaught. The Tet Offensive involved simultaneous strikes on over 100 targets across South Vietnam, including major cities, military bases, and Saigon, the capital. Approximately 85,000 NVA and VC troops executed the offensive with unprecedented coordination and force. Notable battles during the Tet Offensive included the siege of the U.S. Marine base at Khe Sanh, where 6,000 Marines defended against an estimated 20,000 NVA troops for 77 days, and the prolonged conflict in Hue, where NVA and VC forces occupied much of the city, including the historic citadel, for 24 days before being ousted by US and South Vietnamese forces. Walter Cronkite played a significant role in reporting on the Vietnam War, being among the first major American journalists to extensively cover the conflict from Vietnam itself. His involvement included multiple trips to the country, notably in February 1968, following the Tet Offensive. Cronkite's reporting, particularly his commentary following the Tet Offensive, is widely acknowledged as influential in shaping public perception of the war. His famous assertion that the conflict was unwinnable marked a pivotal moment, with President Lyndon B. Johnson reportedly expressing concern about losing support from Middle America upon hearing Cronkite's statement. Through his nightly newscasts on CBS, Cronkite brought the harsh realities of the Vietnam War directly into American homes, earning it the moniker of a living room war. His coverage was lauded for its perceived objectivity and lack of censorship compared to official military reports. Influenced by his experiences as a war correspondent during World War II, Cronkite initially held reservations towards younger reporters questioning U.S. involvement in Vietnam. However, his perspective shifted as he witnessed firsthand the grim realities on the ground. Cronkite's reporting on the Tet Offensive, in particular, is credited with contributing to the decline in public support for the war, as the information and imagery he presented contradicted the government's assertions of progress. On March 16, 1968, the U.S. Army troops charged towards the Vietnamese village of My Lai. The massacre at My Lai remains a harrowing testament to the horrors of war, where as many as 500 unarmed Vietnamese villagers, including men, women, children and infants, were ruthlessly slaughtered by U.S. Army troops. Situated in the hamlet of My Lai 4, within the Sun Mai village in Quang Nhai province, South Vietnam, the massacre unfolded during the Vietnam War. Soldiers from Charlie Company and Bravo Company, both units of the American Division, undertook a military operation in the hamlet, anticipating engagement with Viet Cong forces, but instead encountering innocent civilians engaged in their daily routines. Villagers, including women, children and the elderly, were rounded up and systematically executed, some shot at close range, others herded into a drainage ditch and mercilessly gunned down, and numerous women and girls subjected to sexual assault before meeting their tragic end. The scale of the atrocity is staggering, with estimates of civilian casualties ranging from 347 to 504, rendering it one of the most appalling massacres of civilians by U.S. forces in the 20th century. The brutality extended beyond mere killings, encompassing mutilations, rapes, and the wanton destruction of homes, livestock, and essential supplies, inflicting enduring trauma upon the community. Following its revelation to the public in November 1969, the My Lai massacre incited global condemnation, fueling domestic opposition to America's involvement in the Vietnam War, and prompting soul-searching regarding the conduct of American troops in the conflict. In 1969, anti-war protests spread widely, spanning major cities throughout the United States, such as San Francisco, New York, Oakland, and Berkeley. These demonstrations constituted some of the most widespread expressions of opposition to government policies, particularly regarding the Vietnam War. Washington, D.C. remained a central hub for the anti-war movement, with protesters gathering at prominent locations including the Ellipse, the base of the U.S. Capitol, and the National Mall, amassing in the thousands. Lafayette Park, adjacent to the White House, served as a significant site for protesters to directly address the government. On May 4, 1970, soldiers from the Ohio National Guard shot at unarmed students attending Kent State University, resulting in the deaths of 4 individuals and injuries to 9 others. This event serves as a catalyst for the expanding anti-war sentiment. At the time, around 335,000 U.S. troops were deployed in Vietnam, with roughly 50,000 casualties reported. One notable event, the May Day protest of 1971, emerged as a pivotal anti-war demonstration aimed at completely shutting down Washington, D.C. Protesters strategically camped on the outskirts of downtown to obstruct entrances, exerting significant pressure on the Nixon administration to seek avenues for ending the war. According to CIA Director Richard Helms, this protest intensified the administration's urgency to find resolutions to the conflict. On January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords, formerly known as the Agreement on Ending the War and Restoring Peace in Vietnam, marked a significant step towards peace in Vietnam and the conclusion of the Vietnam War when it was signed, The agreement involved key parties, including the governments of North Vietnam, South Vietnam, the United States, and the Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam, representing South Vietnamese communists. The accords outlined several critical provisions aimed at achieving peace, including a ceasefire, the withdrawal of U.S. troops, the release of prisoners of war, and the reunification of Vietnam through peaceful means. Additionally, an international commission of control and supervision was established to oversee and enforce the agreement, comprising representatives from Canada, Poland, Hungary, and Indonesia. 2 years after the accords were signed, a massive North Vietnamese offensive led to the conquest of South Vietnam on April 30, 1975, resulting in the reunification of the country under communist rule. On March 29, 1973, the final U.S. military unit departed Vietnam, symbolizing the formal conclusion of direct U.S. military engagement in the Vietnam War. Around 58,000 American troops perished in battle. The withdrawal of U.S. forces was a pivotal juncture in the war's narrative, following the ratification of the Paris Peace Accords in January 1973, aimed at securing peace in Vietnam and disengaging the U.S. from the conflict. Finally, on April 29, 1975, American leaders initiated Operation Frequent Wind, representing the ultimate evacuation effort in Vietnam. The operation aimed to extract American civilians and military personnel from Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, alongside tens of thousands of South Vietnamese citizens affiliated with the Republic of Vietnam regime. The urgency of the operation stemmed from the impending capture of Saigon by North Vietnamese forces, who launched their final assault on the city on that same day. Operation Frequent Wind stands as the largest helicopter evacuation in history, with helicopters shuttling individuals from rooftops to a fleet of 26 U.S. ships positioned offshore, including the aircraft carrier USS Blue Ridge. Over 7,000 individuals, including 5,500 South Vietnamese citizens, were evacuated in a critical attempt to rescue those imperiled by the advancing North Vietnamese forces. Saigon underwent a name change to become Ho Chi Minh City, and the formal unification of North and South Vietnam took place on July 2, 1976, leading to the establishment of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Lastly, programs like the Vietnam Wartime Accounting Initiative tried to find missing people and deal with the after-effects of the war. Vietnam changed a lot socially and culturally after the war. They made changes in how they were governed, educated, and how society worked, moving towards being more open and focused on markets. Vietnam's economy also got much bigger after these changes, becoming one of the fastest growing in the area. This helped people live better and have more chances in Vietnam. That is all for today's video. Do you think the war should have ended earlier? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. To watch more videos like this, subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and click the notification bell for updates. Thanks for watching.